I think the pain of carrying the weight of this secret for so long is more damaging than the reveal.
Well, hello and welcome back to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I wanted to talk about something I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is breaking the silence and healing through honesty. Now, it's a theme that came up time and time again on this show, especially with memoirs. Guests will often say, they felt like a weight was lifted after finally sharing something that they'd held inside for many, many years. And it makes me think about confession, as a cradle Catholic. I think about confession, but not just in the religious sense, although I do, but in that very human way of needing to say something out loud in order to heal. In the Catholic Church, we talk about the power of speaking our sins to another person. The priest is in persona Christi. You're all getting a lesson in Catholicism. But really, the healing, in addition to, of course, what we believe in terms of happening through faith and belief, but the healing isn't just about forgiveness. I think it's kind of about, setting something down that we've been carrying around for so long. And that brings me to another thing I've learned. Don't wait too long to share how you feel with somebody, especially the people you love. Because tomorrow isn't promised. I had the opportunity to say what needed to be said to both my brother and my mother before they passed. And they passed within 13 months of each other, actually 13 months to the day of each other. And while I miss them terribly, I also know that I've got some peace because, there was nothing left unsaid between us. And today's guest, why am I saying all this, right? Why am I divulging all this? Well, today's guest, Rob Tonkin, gets that. He gets it. And his new memoir, interestingly entitled Asshole, which we had a little bit of a laugh about. But, it does pull back the curtain on a lifetime in the entertainment business. But more importantly, it dives deep into his own childhood trauma, survival, and a very long road to becoming whole. It's very raw, it's very honest, and I think it'll move you. So uncork something good, whether that's a bottle of wine or even a cup of coffee. Settle in and join me as I uncork Rob's story. Rob Tonkin started in Sacramento radio at the age of 14 and rose to lead the marketing factory, producing the 2 decades-long Honda Civic Tour, which included the Black Eyed Peas, Blink-182, and One Direction. Driven by childhood trauma, he sacrificed his true self to achieve success. His new memoir, Asshole, documents his self-destructive and eventual redemption, sharing hard-won insights into authentic living. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Rob.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. I appreciate the slot.
I'm happy to have you here, Rob. I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
Probably a lot further back than the writing of my book. I think probably the seeds were planted when I worked in radio stations as a teenager. And I used to write what were called liner notes, which were the cue cards. This is long before computers or anything like that, or personal computers, or even businesses having computers. But they would be cue cards that were typewritten for the disc jockeys to have specific lines that they would deliver within their ad-lib style. Some of them had to be read verbatim, and some of them just gave some nods and advice as to what to talk about with facts. And so it started there, and it probably morphed into my career, which was a blend of marketing and music and events and promoting and a lot of these kinds of things, where I was forced to write and do a lot of editing in the process. And eventually, I think this is sort of embarrassing to say, but I wrote more PowerPoints than I could possibly imagine I would have ever had to write in my life. Uh, and I found something to be true in PowerPoints, which helped me a lot in getting the confidence as a writer, is everything in a PowerPoint starts with a lot more words than what it ends with. And so there's this distillation process to make things extremely clear. And the clients I worked for didn't want a PowerPoint that was more than maybe 12 to 14 pages. And I would receive PowerPoints from people that would have stuff all over the page, where instead of distilling it down to one page, they just put 6 pages on one page if it was 50 pages long. And that
Yeah,
used to drive me crazy.
I certainly know that trick, as well as reducing the font size so you can fit more words on the page,
Right,
which
right.
is a nasty little trick, and kind of gets away from the spirit of less is more kind of mentality.
So to bring it full circle in today, uh, after I retired from my work, pretty unceremonious retirement, and which is written about in my book, the eventual demise of my company, or closure of my company. But then I was really deep into therapy and doing EMDR, which is, you know, working with a therapist on some trauma and deep-seated issues. And so through that, one day she said, why don't you write about it? And I thought, well, that's for other people. I don't know. That's not me. And she said, well, I'd really like you to try. So I did. And I found it to be the most cathartic thing that I'd ever done in my life. Somehow that was probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and here I am with a book.
Yeah. So as you were kind of first starting to journal, I'm assuming it's journaling that your therapist was having you do. How did you know that it was working or kind of healing for you?
Well, she did recommend journaling, and it was more like dream dream sequencing, where I'd wake up in the morning and write what I dreamt about, or write the first thing that came to mind. I did that, but not as disciplined as one would want to be. Where I actually found the most power and the most catharsis was in writing stories. So they may have been stories that I discussed with her about my childhood, but it was really going to go back into those and to try to describe the feelings that I had then and the feelings that I have now, and to try to understand what all of that meant and how it worked, and to explain it to another person. So that's when I really thought, okay, there's something to this storytelling. It was, for me, I've always liked talking and telling stories that way. And I think in PowerPoints, that's what I was doing. I was telling stories in almost like a children's book style, because you had to boil it down to a 30-minute presentation that was easy to understand, with lots of information and statistics sometimes. So in this case, it was just boiling my stories down.
Yeah. So at what point do you start to think, hey, this is going to be more than just a therapeutic exercise, and you're going to turn it into, a book that you'd launch out into the world?
I have two trusted friends that I sent a chapter to after I wrote a few stories, right? And then I got this idea, I wonder if I could write a book. I mean, with this, I didn't have any real confidence in my writing. So one of my friends has been a journalist for better part of 40, 50 years, and owns a publication that covers entertainment, home entertainment, which now is streaming. But at one time it was DVDs and VHS tapes. And then the other guy is kind of a raconteur of sorts. You know, a film school graduate who has written a couple of books and is just one of the most intellectual people that I know. So I thought, okay, if these two guys that I know think there's something to my thing, maybe I'll pursue it. And if they don't like it, then that's probably an indication that I shouldn't give up my retirement day job, which is doing nothing. And I thought it was a good use of my time. So one of them said, you've got something here, vomit on paper, keep going. Don't hold anything back. My advice to you is be as truthful and overly honest as you possibly can. Just be authentic. And the other guy said, you're disorganized in your thoughts, but you are a terrific storyteller. And I think that's what writing is all about. And he's taught writing classes as well. So that was what I needed to prop me up and help me make the decision.
Nice. You got a little wind in the sails there early on. It's very important.
Definitely.
Well, what can you share with us about the contents? And I didn't even read the whole title. The whole title is Asshole, a Memoir, Wild Stories of Trauma, Truths, and Transformation. What can you share with us about the contents of the book?
Well, it's a painful story because it goes through a lot of childhood trauma, which I endured, which many, many people do. In fact, I'm one who believes that every person has some degree of traumatic experience growing up because parents are not infallible. Even the best parents that try the hardest can affect our programming. And so it's a lot of my experience in that. But then it also goes into, very sensitive subjects, like I was sexually assaulted or abused, let's say, as a young boy, getting into the entertainment industry through radio stations. So I was groomed and taken advantage of, and the job was held over my head, which meant the world to me. So then I carried shame. So it's the story of all this buried shame and bad feelings inside that I stuffed away and went through my whole life. My parents also were very good people, but the parenting that I got was very neglectful. And that's a form of abuse and trauma if you really break it down. And it affected me a lot. There was a lot of betrayal and abandonment and my self-worth. So the book covers all these things, but I do it in telling the stories of what happened to me. And some of these things are really exciting because I worked in entertainment and around that. So for a lot of people, that's, fodder for entertainment. And they want to know what's behind the scenes. And I was behind the scenes all the time. And I ended up working with, as you mentioned earlier, the Honda Civic Tour. And I was, in big markets even before that. I worked a little bit in international broadcasting where I would do it, like an example, a live concert from U2 and syndicate that across the world. And so I worked with a couple of, real big artists and many, large and medium and small artists too. But I, had all these different experiences. And so I tell these stories taking responsibility for my own actions. And then I also talk about how they affected me and how I needed to change because I was really going through life as this high-charged survivor and in fight or flight with feeling a lot of anxiety. And I soothed my anxiety with workaholism, which is just another form of compulsion. And frankly, it's what my father did. And so it's not foreign to me. And we often become our parents, whether we want to or not. And and then, when it's talking about transformation, that is not something that I went to a weekend seminar to try to do. This has been decades and decades of me making the recognition that something wasn't right and I needed to change. And finding that path to change is very challenging, and it's ongoing. And I'm in my early 60s. So that's hopefully I've answered your question and
Yeah,
then
absolutely. I mean, I've heard it said that transformation and healing is a journey, not a destination. Like there's no endpoint to it. It's just it's the road trip that we're on. It's just it doesn't work like the flick of a switch. Like, oh, I started therapy, I'm better now. It's it takes a long time, a lifetime to sometimes uncover how to live authentically and what are the truths and traumas that we've experienced in the past. It's a journey.
agreed. I think that's accurate. For
Yeah.
me, that's been my experience.
You started by telling or sharing your story of sexual abuse in the entertainment industry. It strikes me we hear a lot about sexual abuse, of course, the Me Too movement over the last 10 or 15 years, Harvey Weinstein, that has captured a lot of interest in the news media. You don't really hear about it that much when, it's a male being victimized, or maybe I'm not, paying attention to it. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's not very sexy, and also it's not very masculine for a man to come out and admit that another man molested him. I mean, I'm a straight guy, and so uh, to, I mean, it actually even affected my own sense of masculinity at times in my life, and made me question my own identity. But I- you know, call me brave, call me stupid. I don't know, naive. I don't really care anymore. I'm at a point now where first of all, I will say society has changed. If this was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I might be less comfortable talking about it. But I feel like it is somewhat just at the surface level, scratching, acceptable in society to talk about this. Now, there's going to be a certain number of people that are going to point a finger at me and make fun of me, whatever. I don't care. So now I have enough sense of myself and my own confidence that I can tell the story in now. I hope that it will help other people. And I've also gained enough insight and strength to be able to separate forgiveness for my perpetrators. Not to say what they did was right. I'm not condoning it whatsoever. But what I'm saying is that they had their own issues. And so I've gained an empathy for them through that. Um, should they have paid for what they did? Sure. One of them's passed away. The other one, I have no idea. Um, but, I've also heard other people that have been sexually abused say that, well, I want to get that person and that will make it all right. And I don't care. I don't think that's true. What is true with me is what's in me and making myself all right. And what happens to that other person is none of my business. That's kind of how that I could be off on my own island with that one, but that's how I feel.
No, I think that's accurate. First of all, you hear that the perpetrators of sexual abuse typically are people who were abused themselves. So this is a pattern that they learned at some point in time and have repeated. But I don't know that there's much to be gained by going after them or seeking retribution, because that might only weigh you down, a little bit more, right? That might give you extra baggage to carry around, and it doesn't really solve for what happened to you in the past. This is me putting a therapist hat on. I am not qualified as a therapist, but I think that's just the way it kind of works, though, where, any kind of anger you feel towards someone else will have an impact on you as well. But if you're able to, you use the word forgive, which I imagine is something that's extremely difficult to do. But, if you're able to get to a point where you can forgive and move on, then that's almost better for you, I think, for your own health.
I think so, but there's ongoing grieving that is going, like to your earlier point, where the healing never really ends. The grieving process and the forgiveness doesn't ever stop. And I think the grieving is more of the ongoing process. For me, that's been the feeling and the thought. And there have been times in my life where I've wished my life went differently, and had a lot of regret, or why did this happen to me? So that's playing the victim, and I've tried to come out of that mindset as well, to change my programming. Really, what it comes down to is wanting to change from within, and it doesn't have anything to do with that other person. That damage is already done to me. I cannot go back and erase it, regardless of whether they're incarcerated or they're hung up on a cross. It's not going to change what's happened to me. As painful as the I think the pain of carrying the weight of this secret for so long is more damaging than the reveal.
Yeah. Yeah, the weight. And now all of a sudden the band song "The Weight" is playing in my head. But that's just it. It's the weight you carry around that's metaphorically on your shoulders, but weighing you down. I imagine just holding a secret or secrets like that for much of your adult life impacted adult relationships you've had in life, or even you mentioned workaholism, but I imagine it had some very negative consequences in your life.
Yes, I've never been married, and I did have an uncle that didn't get married till he was 65, and I have another uncle who never got married at all. Both of them heterosexual, and like myself, but so it's not unusual in my family. One was on my mother's side, the other was on my father's side. And my sisters still have hope for me.
As good sisters do. How did you come up with the title "Asshole"? I mean, it is a striking title, definitely attention grabbing. But how did you settle on that?
Well, in all honesty, the raconteur friend read the book when it was completed, and he had two comments. He said, "Well, this really, I don't know about this memoir stuff. I don't know if people are going to be interested in this, and you got a lot of stuff in here, and it's better than I really thought it was going to be, Rob. But I think really, if you want to be successful, this is really a business book." And I said, "Well, I don't want to write a business book. This is my story. I'm going to continue to work." I worked on it a little bit further from that point of him saying that, but at some point I had to say, it's fine, and it's my art, and it's going to go into the world the way it goes into the world. But at the same time, he said, he's a marketing genius too. He said, "You really need a catchy title. It's the title's everything." And I said, "You're right. So do you have any ideas?" And he came up with the title. Now, probably if I was afraid to talk about sexual harassment, I would be, or sexual abuse, I would be also afraid to put asshole over my, label. And although not only is it a label, I have it over the 5-year-old Rob on the cover, And so there's that juxtaposition. And as soon as he actually sent me a mock-up of that just for fun, I fell in love with it. And I was like, that's it. Because my parents, unbeknownst to them, treated me like an asshole, and in asshole ways. And I was terribly betrayed by both of them at different times, and abandoned by both of them at different times, and became kind of an object of sorts. And so then I get into this redemptive, entertainment world where I'm getting attention and I get taken advantage of and groomed and abused, sexually abused. So by assholes. And then I go further into this industry and I rise up, in the industry and work hard and do all these things and put my head down, and, there's no life outside of here. I grew up very fast and I'm surrounded by sharks and assholes. So naturally I became one, not all the time, but I'm sure that there are a number of people that would have said behind my back, that guy's such an asshole. And I'm sure that happens to a lot of people, at times, but it probably happened more times to me than others. So that's why I picked the title, both to grab attention and also because I think it's true. And it's asshole behaviors, and it has many meanings to it. And I'm having fun with that.
Yeah. I love the term. I mean, because most of the time there's no better word to use to describe somebody. Sometimes the word just works. We used to go on these long road trips between Connecticut and Florida as a family, and you see a lot of asshole drivers. And my father used to call them, when we were young, he used to call them club members. Somebody would cut him off and be like, "Oh, that guy's a club member." And we're like, "Dad, what is this club you're talking about?" And he'd be like, "Oh, the asshole club." And if somebody did something really egregious, they'd be the president of the asshole club. So that was always funny. My father was never one for a lack of words.
I mean, I don't think your father's unlike most people. And I think that the word is pretty ubiquitous at this point. And I even think that most kids, that might be the first bad word, they'll probably learn bitch before that if they're going to hear profanity, because that has other, meanings and they can say it. And I remember as a youngster hearing that song, "The Bitch Is Back" from Elton John, and thinking, how can they say that on the radio? Now, now we've got, the WAP song from Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion that, 6-year-olds are listening to, reciting the lyrics, and you're like, okay, well, times have changed. But have they? But have they? Because when I grew up, the Rolling Stones were singing about drugs and, counterculture and rape and murder and, things like that in their songs. And the Beatles did, even though they were cleaner, so to speak, but they sang about a lot of those things too.
Sure. Well, Frank Sinatra sang about, banging women, but he just didn't say banging women. He used, it was a different, maybe there was more elegance, I'm not sure, but there's always been messages like that in popular music, that's for sure. When you're going through and you're writing it, what does it do to you? How healing was it for you to actually get it from out of your head and onto, I'd say onto paper, but probably onto a computer screen? But just in the telling of your story and the sharing of your story, did you notice that there was a healing process as part of that?
I have a quote at the beginning of the book, and I may be slightly misquoting it, but does the pain come from the writing, or does the writing come from the pain? The person who wrote that quote is Alyssa Gabbert, I think. Like I've said already, you're carrying around I sometimes use the metaphor of a trash bag, a big, huge, lawn leaf sized trash bag full of stuff. And a lot of it's handed to you through this generational pass off. And your parents don't really mean to give it to you, but they don't want to hold it anymore. And their parents gave it to them. So now it's my job in my life to put those bags down and empty them out and stop carrying them around. So for me, part of the writing process was emptying out those bags and getting all this out and helping other people realize that it's okay to talk about almost anything. I had one woman read the book early, and I didn't send it to her. I sent it to a friend who's in the book because I wanted him to, read his section. And he's not an avid reader in the last 20 years. Prior to that, earlier in life, he was, but he kind of got out of the habit of reading a lot. So his girlfriend recently looks at this and she said, "What are you reading?" And he passed her the book, and then he started to read it. She started to read it. And she was enthralled with this book. And, I don't know her at all. And she then texted me and told me how much she liked the book and this and that. And then he brought her over to meet me to go to lunch. And we had lunch. And she explained to me that she saw a lot of herself in the book because she lived in LA and, didn't live the life that I lived, but thought it was really nostalgic for her to go down these stories and to be able to feel what somebody else felt. So that was very rewarding for me. And, I said at the very beginning, if I can help one person, it's all worth it, because maybe it helps release one person and some of the baggage that they're carrying, or helps them realize that they need to change and that it's okay. And so that's a lot of it for me.
Yeah. I mean, just to help them. Yeah. Just help other people feel seen is another takeaway there. It's not necessarily you sort of airing your grievances with the world for payback. It's more, how can I help other people, benefit from my story, from what I'm hearing anyway.
Yes, and most of my book is not about what this person did to me or what that person did to me. Sure, there's aspects of that in the storytelling, but in each of those cases, I've tried. Now, I don't know if I've been 100% successful, but I've tried to take responsibility for myself and I've tried to look back and understand what was going on and understand how I could have done things differently. As an example, I got fired from a job because I was on the radio, and a woman came into the studio while I was on the air who worked at the radio station, and she was doing some type of inventory for the commercials that we would play. And so in those days, I would try to have what I called a perfect show. So as a disc jockey, I wanted every word to be perfect. I didn't want to step on the vocals with my voice and things like that. And I had flubbed something up before she came in the studio. And so I was already kind of on my own case. And then you're programmed with all the angst and anger from whatever's happened to you as a kid in childhood trauma. And I unleashed on her because she asked me a question right before I opened the microphone to do a bit, and I screwed up again. And so I blamed it on her. And then I got fired because I told her to F off in a very high volume after the microphone was off. And I thought I was pretty cool at that time and rebellious, and that was okay, and didn't realize it until a few days later when I was unceremoniously cut from the team. So I take responsibility. If I could go back, I would realize that that woman was doing her job and I wouldn't have reacted like that, um, it was unfair of me to do that. And so I've tried to take accountability in that respect.
Yeah. But I'm sure, I'm not, maybe I'm not sure, but you also can think about it as, why did that happen to you? I mean, why it happened to you, because of, you shouting F off to this woman. But what I'm curious about is if there's a benefit you received from that experience, like why did this happen for you at that time? Have you ever thought about stuff like that? Like this bad thing that happened to me, well, it was really something that happened for me because it either taught me something or it led to another opportunity.
I would call that cause and effect. And yes, I was in Bakersfield at the time, and you may not be familiar with Bakersfield, but it's the reputation of no offense to people that live there, but it's not known as an amazing, you know, gorgeous city to live in. It's a lot of oil, especially when I lived there in the early 80s. It was oil and cows, and it's at the very base of the San Joaquin Valley. It's very hot, and uh, not a place. I didn't like it, putting it mildly. And so where did that lead me to after being fired? It led me to Carlsbad, California, which is North San Diego County, which is one of the nicest places you could possibly want to live. Um, and I ended up, going from being inland to coastal heaven. And so, to your point, that's probably the reward. And then that led me to a much bigger radio job than I had at that time. And is it luck? Is it the universe? I don't know.
I'm sure there's a little bit of talent involved there as well as networking and connections.
That too.
Yeah. What drew you to radio it sounds like you got involved in radio as a teenager. What drew you to radio?
Well, if you have a very painful home life, you're looking for any way to soothe that pain. For me, I felt that I was kind of on my own, and I needed recognition for things that I liked to do. And I didn't get a lot of that's great job, as a kid. It's like if I didn't do it my parents' way or what they wanted me to do, then everything was kind of conditional and transactional. So I think there was a lot of love withheld. So that's really what I was searching for, is that the recognition, the validation. And I started playing radio contests in order to hear my name announced on the radio station as a winner, or to sometimes they would record my voice. Hey, you're the 12th caller. You just won. What's your name? And I'd say my name and where I was from and what, and well, you'd get excited and they'd play it back. They usually recorded it. They usually didn't do it live. And listening back to that was just like mind-boggling to me. And that was, warmth came over me. It was that's how I got into it. And I would sort of like, well, this disc jockey's great. And then I'd call and talk to the DJs on the request line and ask them how they got into the business. And they knew my name. I became kind of a groupie of these guys. And then eventually I won a prize, and my mom took me to the radio station to pick up the prize. And there was nobody at the reception desk. And I didn't learn boundaries as a kid. And I just walked right down the hallway and walked right past the whole thing and really walked right in. And that's how it started.
Wow. Yeah, I always love those origin stories. I think also, like, Mike, I have three 23-year-olds. I have triplets, and they didn't grow up listening to the radio like we did, because they had, well, like when they got a little bit older, they had streaming, but they had internet. um, it's a different, like, today's generation. This is like, content warning. I'm about to sound like an old man, but today's generation, they will not know like the excitement of having to wait to listen to the radio for your favorite song to be played because everything is on demand now. But back in the day, you wanted to hear Van Halen Jump in 1984. You had to turn on the radio, and you had to wait for it. You didn't always have it, and there was an anticipation there. And these DJs became these personalities that were in I mean, I think about all the time listening to the local radio stations where I live in Connecticut, and just kind of missing that aspect of it because it's sort of a dying craft.
Well, strangely, here we are in a version of it.
Right.
It's gotten so splintered and so fragmented that you're one of those people now. In a sense, you are the DJ, and you are on the air, and we're having this interactive conversation, which is the modern version. It's just, fragmented that far out. So every subject under the sun is covered. And it used to be, music, weather, and events, current events. And that was what radio stations revolved around. And, sure, you'd listen for the song Jump. And then how about turning a cassette recorder on to record the songs that you actually liked, and you'd make mixtapes that way. I mean, you say that to your 23-year-olds, they'd be like, "You're crazy. Why would you waste your time with that?"
Yeah.
And, yeah.
We just have to pause so I can do time and temperature. Um, and I don't know why I chose Van Halen Jump. It is probably my least favorite Van Halen song, but on one of my least favorite Van Halen albums. I didn't think 1984 was all that good, but that's just me.
Well, I do have a chapter that's called "Go Ahead and Jump," and it is inspired by that song.
I tell you what, I could see David Lee Roth doing high kicks in my mind's eye right now. That man was he was very flexible.
Well, he was a great frontman.
Oh, quintessential frontman. But have you ever listened to him on the radio?
I have not listened. Well, I've seen interviews and I've seen him on snippets on social media, and he has a very quick mind.
Extremely.
And I've seen him on Howard Stern, excerpts of Howard Stern, and yeah, very, very interesting person. And now, I do have a story of Eddie Van Halen, which I didn't put in detail in the book. You do have to. Not everything could go into this book, but I did have a story of. I mention it in passing, but I did go to a concert that Van Halen's manager at the time when Sammy Hagar joined the band was somebody who was a friend of mine, an older guy who was kind of a little bit of a mentor, but he had, been pretty legendary in the music industry and worked in William Morris in New York. He was one of the agents that helped bring the Beatles to Shea Stadium. He managed an artist named Petulia Clark years ago that did the song Downtown and so on. Managed the Carpenters, which was, another big act. Anyway, he managed Sammy Hagar and then eventually Van Halen. And then he was fired along with Sammy eventually. But he, sorry, maybe he never did get fired, but he did pass away. About 3 months before he passed away, he invited me to go to Arizona to see the band play at an open air theater there. And so after the show is over, he puts me in a limo with a friend of mine who was the corporate attorney for the company I was working for, and who was also invited. And we're with Eddie Van Halen, and we're on our way to a strip club. And so we end up at the strip club, and my friend and I get so drunk at the strip club and previous drinks at the show or whatever. By that time, we're not probably behaving as well as we should have. And being with a rock star at a strip club is a totally different experience than two guys going to a strip club. Every single stripper in the entire club came over to our table. It was like the king had walked in. Um, and Eddie was probably very used to this, and it was normal behavior for him. I mean, it was a mind blower for me. And my buddy and I, eventually, Eddie leaves, and the limo takes him somewhere and then comes back for us, but we're at the club, and I don't remember what we did to be thrown out of the club, but the two of us were actually thrown out of the club after Eddie had exited. So whatever our behavior escalated down to, we, I think it takes a lot to get kicked out of a strip club. And so that was not, there's my Van Halen story.
Yeah. Was he in a good mood that night?
Eddie was very quiet, but yes, he was friendly and in a good mood. And I don't know if he left with a stripper or not. I didn't. I was so into my own world right then in that moment that I kind of lost track of exactly what was going on with him.
Yeah. I appreciate us all this talk about the book and how vulnerable you are in discussing it. It's a powerful story, and I know it's going to help a lot of people feel seen. But I do, if you could indulge me, just one more question about the biz. What do people? What are some common misunderstandings that the average person might have about sort of working in the entertainment industry? Because I think there's for those of us who are not really in it, we think it's one way, and I'm sure it's another. So what would we learn if we looked behind the scenes of your career?
Well, maybe the easiest way to describe that is the myth of the backstage at a concert. At least for me, growing up, I assumed that there was always a party going on backstage, and that there were drugs, women, wild sex in the working class, and I didn't find that. Not to say it doesn't exist, it does, but mostly it was hardworking people that had a job to do, and it's a rough job to stage a concert and move on to the next city on a tour. And people don't really realize what a grind that is, for the crew, for the talent. So I think the myth of that is a lot of it. But there's also a deeper hurt that I think a lot of artists and successful people have. Let's just say high achievers, whether they're CEOs or they are athletes or any form of celebrity, they seem to all be driven. And what is the driver? You see a lot of them fade out and end up in drugs and problems and relationship issues and this and that and the other thing. And you're constantly reading about all these things. I think there's an inordinate amount of trauma, mental health, emotional health that goes unchecked behind the scenes in these industries and in these positions of power. Because these are people that are willing to forsake themselves and create personas to pursue whatever it is. And I was one of them on a very small scale. So I can speak from my own experience, and then I've been around it and I've seen a lot of it in others. And it manifests in all kinds of ways, whether it's narcissistic behavior or it's sociopathic behavior, or it's, just disregard for others or arrogance. I mean, it comes out in so many different unhealthy ways. And I'm not to say there's not a lot of healthy people in these positions too, but I think I would say it's an inordinately larger number of unhealthy than healthy.
Yeah. And when you do reach the top, like so many of the people you're talking about, it is lonely up there. I mean, that is a truism. It's lonely at the top. So compound feelings of loneliness with putting on this persona, this face to the world, who's likely not who you really are, and all the expectations that come along with that. It's not all roses. It's not all roses.
Right. I mean, we see the people on screen, or we read about them, or we see them in interviews, and they are who they want to present, just like social media now. And there's a lot of personas created on social media, which is kind of correlating to what used to be radio and used to be entertainment has, like fragmented into social media. Like you're the DJ and well, they're the performer in social media also. So there are these personas created to market themselves. And is that really who the person is? Don't know. TBD.
Yeah. Well, Rob, where can people pick up a copy of Asshole, a memoir, Wild Stories of Trauma, Truths, and Transformation?
Well, after July 21st, it will be available on Amazon and other places where ebooks are sold. And then in August of this year, it will be available in Amazon and all the regular places books are sold. If they want to get it in a store, in a bookstore, and it's not available, the store can order it. They just have to look up the ISBN number, and the store can order it for them. I'm hoping to be in a lot of independent bookstores, at least in California, if not in other places, in some of the spots also where the book mentions the local flavor because of something I experienced there.
Very cool. And then where can...
And it will be an audiobook too.
Do you read the audiobook or did you hire that out?
No, I do narrate it myself.
That is a labor of love. So congratulations on that. Rob, where can people learn more about you? Do you have a website? Do you have any social media that you're active on that you can share with us?
Yes. So I do have a website. It's robtonkin.com. And I know that's incredibly hard to believe, but that's what the URL is. And I'm on Instagram and TikTok under my name with an underscore at the end. And I'm also on some of the other social channels. And I also write a Substack that is called Opinions Matter by Rob Tonkin. And I try to post to that at least once a week. And some of it, relates to entertainment. I do reviews of some streaming shows that movies and entertainment, but I also write about life and things that I've experienced and just things that I think hopefully make people think. And more to come on that, but I try to post at least once a week there, and it's free if you're willing to sign up for Substack, which is also free.
Cool. I'll put all those links in our show notes so people can find you on all of those platforms and your website easily. And Rob, I'll say thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you, Mike. It was a pleasure. I appreciate it, and it's nice meeting you.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.